All right, well, welcome everyone to our webinar tonight. We're going to be talking about the home sale contingency, specifically going through an exercise of understanding a real life situation, hopefully give you some feedback on how to write some things. Some of you have never done a home sale contingency in your career. And it's so funny because tonight, as I was preparing and putting some final touches on our PowerPoint for tonight, I recognize that it's been a while since we did the home sale contingency training, and it's almost to the date a year ago. So obviously June seems to be the time when people start waking up and saying, and this was again before COVID, I am thinking about selling my house and buying another one. It seems to be the right month to have this conversation. So glad to be talking about it today, but it's hilarious that I'm literally working or modifying a PDF or a PowerPoint that happens to be the contingency training that we did last year, almost to the same date. So go ahead and start the sharing. Shannon, if you could pull up the screen, that's great. We're going to talk about some different plans. As we go through this, if you have questions, just shoot a chat or a message to the group, and we'll hopefully get some good dialogue going through on this board. If you have any questions specifically around a contract that you're working on, currently that is something that either myself or Jerry Kay can take on. Jerry Kay will be back in the office tomorrow, so excited about that to have some extra help. We are having a great month in June. Our numbers look really, really good. But with that comes a lot of questions when it comes to home sale contingencies. Let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about today, really, I'm not going to spend a lot of time. In fact, the 22Q is at the very end. If we have time, I'll go through what that means. But some of you who are newer may need to jot down this note or take a picture of this, because I get asked this question a lot by newbies. New agents that just jumped into this business and do not know the difference between a 22Q, Form 22Q, or a Form 22B. Specifically today, we're going to talk about the 22B, not so much about the 22Q. The biggest difference between the 22Q and the 22B is the 22Q is for something. If you were a listing agent and got an offer that had a 22Q, that means that buyer's agent's their home or that buyer's home is already under contract.
Audio gone.
Specifically talk tonight about a real life example about the 22B usage and how we use the contingency notices and the bump notices. I want to at least get through that tonight. So let's go to the next slide. We had a situation, both Jerry Kay and I have been working on this, and this is before COVID. Seller, we didn't represent them. That is a condo kind of in the Ruston Way area. And that condo was a seller that went into our home on the right, our listing out there in Edgewood. And they came through when there was multiple offers. That happened to be because of the price point, we received 3 offers on that home on the right. And one of the 3 offers, actually all 3 of them had a home to sell. One of them was wanting our client to get out of the home really fast, and we didn't want to accept that. So that was one of the offers. But all of the rest of the offers were using the Form 22B or the home sale contingency. And so the question really tonight that we're going to uncover is, what is the strategy? What are we seeing right now? And what we are seeing is that condos are taking longer to sell. So if you are currently working with So we accepted, this is again the story, we accepted the contingent sale of the condo before COVID. We did a couple extensions, and finally our seller has been getting a lot of phone calls. You can go to the next page, Shannon. They've been getting a lot of phone calls because what happens is that buyers agents who are actively looking in an inventory challenged market where it's not very much inventory in this luxury 900K price point in Edgewood have been actively looking specifically for homes that are in great condition. And so what these buyers agents are doing is they're selecting active and contingent, and they're actually contacting listing agents just like me or Jerry Kay to find out if our seller would be interested in looking at another offer. Now, certainly they had to go out and take a look at the property, which obviously proves challenging during COVID or, having everything regulated and kind of shut down. But as the restrictions were eased in Pierce County, we started to see more activity, more showings, people calling us, asking to show the property. Well, we happened to get a showing that was excellent. They love the home. They are not contingent on the sale of their home. And we spoke with the sellers, and the sellers said, yes, they were interested. We've already extended twice with the other buyer, the condo buyer. So we needed to go ahead and consider maybe a plan B so they can move on and sell their property. So let's go to the next slide, but you can go ahead and contact those. People ask me that all the time. Can I contact contingent sellers? Absolutely. There's no rule against that. If you have a client who's looking for maybe a property, it doesn't hurt to contact that listing agent that has that contingent sale and ask some more questions. One of the questions you may want to ask is, how long is their bump? How long is the bump period that you accepted? Now that reflects on the 22B, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but let's go through the scenario so you understand. So the second buyer comes to me and says, yes, I want to go ahead and offer. They submitted an offer. The offer happened to be more than our asking price, which was great because they have to bump that other person. So they have to be as tight as possible. And so this is a counteroffer on the right that I provided after speaking with my client. We went ahead and added the Form 39. In order for this counteroffer to accept basically another offer on the home, we had to add the Form 39. So that was one of the mistakes that this newer broker made when she submitted an offer. So in the addenda line on the first page of the purchase and sale agreement, if you want to avoid a counteroffer, my tip or trick or the rule really is to go ahead and include the Form 39 when you're offering on a contingent property. Now, certainly when I created the counteroffer, I wanted to button up or counter as many things as possible. And you could see our little counteroffer. I shortened the timelines of the 22A. I shortened the timelines of the 22T. I shortened the timeline of the septic contingency because we already had it pumped and recorded. I shortened everything down that I possibly could to give this second buyer a fighting chance and make it something that was desirable for our seller. The only thing that they countered back on was with the 15 days, they felt that was quite strong. I went ahead and countered 20, and we got mutual acceptance on the second buyer. So second buyer, basically, good evening, Megan. At your buyer's request, you asked us to deliver the bump notice. Again, we're going to talk about the bump notice in a minute here. But the first buyer normally in the 22B has 5 days to make their response. So once we clear the contingencies, and we'll kind of show you the bump in a minute. If you want to go to the next page, and I can flip between the two pages. Actually, go one more. Sorry. So this is the bump notice and the bump response. So in the bump response, it's in the second buyer addendum. I don't have that ready to go, but basically in the second buyer's addendum, the Form 39, if you go back to the first page, Shannon, I'm sorry, I'm a little over the place today, but Form 39 basically gives the information of when we can deliver the bump notice. And so when that bump notice goes out, we have to make sure that we clear some of the contingencies. The second buyer addendum, Form 39, outlines that. And if it's your first time, you're probably going to want to call me and I'll walk you through, if you're the listing agent, how to understand how that Form 39 works. But basically what that means is I checked the box so that when Form 39, we had to be past our inspection, we want to be past our financing, or we want to be past our septic. You can determine that as a listing agent when you want to deliver the bump notice. So this email was created to just keep that buyer informed. At your buyer's request, you asked us to deliver the bump notice, which was on Sunday instead of Monday. We could deliver the bump notice per the contract, but the buyer has normally 5 days on the 22B to make their response. So they have to kind of wait. So you have to make sure that that person or that buyer who's trying to bump that first buyer out of position has the patience or the stomach to be involved in this, because it is not for the faint-hearted, and it is a little nerve-wracking because they're putting up money for inspections, they're doing probably appraisal. This potential buyer had already spent probably $200 or $300 even to do a check on something that they wanted to check. They waived their inspection, they paid more for the home in order to get the sellers to agree to the second buyer. But that's kind of the communication with the second buyer is right there on the left. Go to the next slide. This is the bump communication. So on the left, that's the conversation I had with the condo listing agent, and on the right is the conversation that a contingent buyer. So again, they have the stomach for this. We will wait longer and trust the process, but yes, it is hard to wait. This pretty much sums up how buyers agents feel when they're in this bumping position. We would not ask for you to do anything against what the contract says, and we respect the first buyer and their time to try and achieve their goal. We will do our best to keep busy to pass the time, and thank you for letting us know when you know, and please let us know when you know something. So again, it's really good that you keep good communication dialogue between that second buyer, because it is a long time. If you leave the 22B, that bump period at 5 days, it is nerve-wracking. So they had to wait the entire 5 days. And if you see on the left, great news, I'll let the Bates know, that's a text message from obviously in April when we were having a text dialogue with the condo listing agent on the first buyer, checking in on the bump notice. Have your sellers or buyers decided on what they're going to do? I sent that to them again, day 3, day 4, just to kind of move it along. And then she sent this, again, this is the condo seller / first buyer. We almost had a cash offer on Monday. That was just this last Monday. We had 2 calls yesterday, hoping for a Hail Mary. I don't think they're willing to go non-contingent. So we're probably going to have to submit the Form 46, canceling by Friday. I believe we haven't. The bump period. Let's go to the next slide. So these are the bump notice. So the bump notice, that form that we have here on the right, seller gives notice that the buyer has accepted another offer. That is the notice that I sent to the condo seller / our first buyer. Seller gives the notice, the seller signs it. We have to deliver it appropriately according to the second buyer addendum, which we did. And then the bump response is what we used for the buyer, for the buyer of the condo. They ended up selecting the third box. The buyer's property had not sold. That cash buyer they were expecting did not come in, and they had to terminate. Buyer has not accepted. So then that puts us into position with the other buyer, with the second buyer, and we had to put them into position. So if the buyer, let's say the example would be, and that means that that second buyer, I would have to give them notice that unfortunately they could not proceed. So that bump response is very important, that you deliver it, that you communicate it, and that you understand what your buyers are signing, because it does in essence kill the deal, or it does contingency is satisfied and they proceed to closing per the contract. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is the Form 22B that I've been referring to, and hopefully it kind of got your mind at least working tonight so that you understand there's a lot of moving parts. It's not a simple, basic cookie cutter. In fact, most brokers have not in a long time dealt with a home sale contingency utilizing even the 22B, especially when the inventory has been challenged. It's very rare that you would want to use the home sale contingency. But there are still some contingencies with COVID where the buyers and sellers came to an agreement that, hey, we're going to take our home off the market. I'll put it in contingent status so I don't have the people coming and going through my house. And for our seller, it made a lot of sense back in March when we accepted the 22B. The one thing that I wish I would have done before, and again, it's always easy to kind of second guess yourself after you've gone through this 5-day waiting period, would be if I was representing the seller, and again, we were kind of in a different type of place back in March, I probably would have countered the first buyer, and actually see on term 4, line, you can barely see it, line 36, what I should have done is probably put in there, instead of 5 days, shorten that bump period to 2 days. If I was a listing agent, that's probably the best course of action in a market like ours. I would have hated to have lost that second buyer if they didn't have the stomach to wait the 5 days, because it's a long time to wait, to do their inspections and do all of this work. And then on top of that, we have to wait 5 days in order for us to deliver the bump. So, you might want to consider that as you're communicating, or as you're, countering back and forth. The other thing that's important to realize when you use the 22B, if you're the listing agent, is on line 7-8. It says that if not filled in 45 days, that means I'm going to put myself into a contingent status. So if I was representing the seller, the contingent status would be, if not filled in, we would be in contingent status on the MLS for 45 days, unless they are giving us notice and they remove their contingency. So that's a long time as well. In a marketplace that's starting to rebound and things are starting to happen, you may also want to consider countering that if you're working with a seller and a buyer, and maybe coming up with some middle ground. I've had some very savvy listing agents in my career where I've asked for the 45 days or the 30 days, and they said, Rochelle, this market is so fast moving, let's go ahead and let's counter you on term 8. Why would your property, that's a first-time home buyer category, maybe it's a single family home, it's 3-bedroom, 2-bath, it's one of those perfect situations, right? Not a condo that's going to sit on the market a long time, but it's one of those single family homes, easy to sell properties, and they're just basically moving up, right? They're just kind of, what would be the harm in countering you on the 45 days and only giving you 2 weekends to get that property under contract, and so that you could remove your home sale contingency? And we've had really good dialogue back and forth when it came to that. And I understood where they're coming from. And if you know the contract and you read the contract, that but there is some good strategy around how to negotiate on that line number 8. So don't be stuck in a box and just thinking the default is the way to get it done. You may have to actually do some good hard negotiation on term number 1 in order for that deal to get solidified. The loan application, again, they have some protection. There's also contingency satisfied. Let's go to the next slide. When the contingency is satisfied, and this is a property notice, when the contingency is satisfied, let's say, for example, that scenario I gave you with the Rambler, where I put the home on the market, it went mutual after the first weekend, then I need to send over a copy of the mutual contract to that seller, right? So it would be attached with the 90K. Many of you don't even know. In fact, Jerry Kay and I have had conversations with many of you where you didn't even know you have to deliver that 90K. If you use a 22B, it's a corresponding notice form that has to keep that listing agent informed when you do um, 22B. Should I have a lot of audio issues today? It must be the way. Ooh, let me mute line here. There we go. Sorry about that, you guys. We're having. Should I turn my volume down?
Turn off your audio on that computer. Just pop out.
Pop out. Totally.
Mm-hmm.
You want to leave the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do it by phone. All right. So the 90K, I know cell phone issues totally going on all over the place here. So the 90K, if you look at the property contingency notice, what you're going to see is that you have the buyer's property is satisfied. And if you don't use the 90K, what could happen is that you are breaching your contract and your client's earnest money becomes almost non-refundable. So you want to make sure that you're delivering the 90K along with that mutual contract. The important part to remember is that mutual contract on, say, that Rambler, that 3-bedroom, 2-bath, simple property that you know will sell in the first weekend on the market, and you deliver that 90K, you got to make sure that contract that you accepted is not less than 30 days or greater than 60 days. And it's all talks about this on the 22B. You have to read the contract and know how that correlates with the 90K notice. So just be careful that you don't get yourself, again, if it's outside of that range, that 30 days, less than 30 days or more than 60, it requires you to give that seller or that listing agent of the property you're giving notice to, give them, get written notice that it's okay for that closing date to be sooner or later so that they can make arrangements when they sell their home and they move out to find another place to live. So that's why the contract is structured in that way, to make sure that sellers that are accepting a contingency are not left homeless because of some crazy negotiation that you did when you sold the Rambler, the simple 3-bedroom, 2-bath Rambler that was easy to sell. So it protects the seller in that way. Okay, next slide. So then you start looking at closing dates. And when you're writing up a Form 22B and you are actually utilizing a 22B when you're offering on properties, one of the common mistakes that I see a lot of you make is you actually fill in a closing date on your purchase and sale. Whenever you use a 22B, you do not use a closing date. The 90K and the 22B actually take priority over the closing date that you wrote on first page of the purchase and sale. So there's no need for you to actually write anything on that first page when you're writing up a home sale contingency utilizing the 22B. But realize that when you're looking at the delivering the 90K notice, that it reflects the 22B. If you want to go back a couple steps, Shannon, I'll show them on the 22B, where it talks about if you contingencies satisfied, it talks about that the closing date would be, I believe, 3 days. Is that correct, Shannon?
Yeah.
It's 3 days from when you close on the other property. So when that 3-bedroom
line 42
closes, what will happen is that deal will close, and then this contingent property where they're selling their home, that seller will have within 3 days. It has to close within that time frame unless otherwise agreed upon by the parties. So you have to watch that, because I got myself stuck last year where we had a battle with Redfin, and I ended up having to pay for some Airbnb, which was not fun, as well as half of a mover to try to get myself out of that situation, because I had to realize, oopsies, even though we had this 22B has priority over the other contingency on the first page of the purchase and sale. So it's a 3-day period. It won't have to close 3 days after the other one closes. The 3-bedroom, the first sale, then this one would close next. It's subsequent. Okay. I think that's it. So when you're looking at contingency notification periods, realize that it's computation of time. So let's give you one last example before we wrap up and open up for questions, because I know I covered a lot of content tonight. But let's just say we got mutual acceptance on the home sale the contingent property. Let's say that condo. For this agent's sake, I wish she would have got that contingent, that cash buyer that was willing to pay what they were asking for, because that was a great buyer and I loved them. I met them at the open house before COVID. fantastic buyers, would have loved to have closed that house in Edgewood for them and get them out of that condo situation. But let's just say, if it would have been better for their scenario that we got mutual on the 15th, that means that they would have had to have delivered the 90K notice to us on Thursday. So they have 3 days to deliver the 90K notice to us, along with a copy of that mutual contract of that condo. If they did not deliver that mutual contract along with the 90K, they run the risk that they have waived all of the other contingencies that are within our contract, and they have to proceed as instructed to the closing table within 30 days. So that puts a lot of pressure on people. And then you run the risk that you have not understood your job as their real estate agent. Even as so far as the way delivery notices were done, unfortunately, the real life situation, this particular listing agent lost a little bit of trust because she did not understand the bump response and how much time she had. She actually had more time. She had an extra day that she didn't have to respond on the bump response. So you can play it all the way up till the last hour. And in that case, she would have had better trust that she would have had with her seller/buyer. But as it stood, she sent over the bump response a little bit too early. I mean, she could argue the fact that there was a Hail Mary for sure. But again, that seller/buyer has invested money in inspections and appraisals, and it did lose a little bit of trust on their part. And we had to try to build that back up for this agent because she was a very good agent, very, very busy agent, top agent in Tacoma. It's really unfortunate this deal didn't come together. And what's funny, or the ironic part of it, is the second buyer, as I walked her through it, and as Jerry Kay helped her through it as well, that was her very first contingent sale and her first bumping incident ever in her entire career. So that's kind of how it goes sometimes, where you learn as you go. Hopefully this training was helpful for many of you, just kind of getting a flavor for what you're up against. There's a lot of moving parts and forms that are required. Shannon, is there any questions that I have? Or if you want to type your question, go ahead and do that now.
Sure. And I know that we had quite a few audio issues as we were going through there. So
I'm so sorry about that.
So please, if you've got questions, feel free to pipe in. But one of the questions that we had through the chat was, do you represent the seller in writing the Form 39?
Do you represent the seller in writing the Form 39? Well, the Form 39 is part of the contract. It does get signed by both parties. So in essence, it is just like a form. I would consider it like a Form 36, where you basically have to have it because you're already mutual with the first buyer. You would need the Form 39 that is signed by both buyer and seller. And you might want to just pull that up and read it, but it does get incorporated into the contract.
Okay, another question we had, I'll go with the one that just came in. Do buyer's agents still need to deliver a 90K when both sales close?
So you can run the risk if you don't. Again, has that happened in our firm? Absolutely, where the 90K was never delivered, but the contracts closed just fine. It's just you run the risk. Your earnest money becomes non-refundable, and you run the risk that if something happens with that other sale, or they can't get the funds, or the financing gets delayed, you're running the risk that your earnest money could be in jeopardy if things do not close as expected. So have we closed it without the notice? Yes. I wouldn't want you to risk ruining your opportunity to exit the contract if something unforeseen happens. And that happens a lot lately, where financing doesn't work out, or we need to negotiate an extension. If you have not given 90K and the copy of the purchase and sale agreement, again, is that good communication with the other party? Probably not, but can it be done? Yes. You just are going to be up against the wall when it comes to deadlines and dates.
Right. So another question we had, and I think we've already actually talked about this together, but can a listing agent choose to, and even if they have it in writing with the buyer's agent, can they choose to have their listing remain active instead of changing it to contingent?
No, that is a violation of the Northwest MLS. If you find that is occurring, please let me know. I caught our good friends over at one of our competitors that did that, and it's not in line with our cooperative nature at the MLS. So no, you cannot you have to change the status to contingent once it goes contingent. So no, that is not, we can't just hold things open. You have to change the status on the contingency.
Another question for buyers agents who are representing contingent buyers in this way. You're seeing all these transactions come through. Do you think that they're offering and getting the deal when they're asking over asking price, or is list price still an acceptable way to get a contingency through?
I would say you have to be, I mean, if you're asking for to bump people or to ask for home sale contingencies, you're going to have to pay over the asking most likely. And if you're bumping, it's going to have to be really, really good to bump that other party out. So you might want to ask and talk with the listing agent a bit more about what it would take. So you handle that conversation very much like if you were involved in a multiple offer situation. You know, what would make the sellers happy? What would make them accept our offer and put us into backup position or put us into the second buyer position? Those types of questions you do with the escalation is probably the same type of philosophy or strategy that you'd want to do with the home sale contingency bump. So yeah, tighten your deadlines, tighten your inspection, tighten your financing. For this one, the scenario tonight, they did waive inspection, but they went ahead and they got permission to at least do a septic evaluation and have a plumber look at the sump pump. But did they get a copy of the 35, kind of the inspection report that the seller provided? Yeah. And a copy of the Form 17 with some more information? Yes. In order for them to make a good decision to move forward and waive their inspection. So yes, a lot of that is, again, negotiated, but you have to be pretty strong when you're trying to bump or you're trying to get a seller to agree to have a home sale contingency.
Okay, and then one last one. As you're reviewing everybody's files, are you seeing contingent properties like this closing on time, or are they tending to extend like a lot of other deals were this last month?
Well, we've seen extensions, certainly, and that's up to the seller whether they want to extend or if they want to go back to pending. At that day 45, on term 1 of 22B, if that timeline passes, the earnest money gets refunded back to the buyer and the seller goes back to the open market. So if you're wanting to extend that, that is up to the seller. And yes, I am seeing more extensions on those. That's why I would, if I was a buyer's agent, I would go ahead and make those phone calls because things change as things progress, right? And as things open up right now, we're seeing sellers that may have not wanted to go with a second buyer, but now they may be willing to do that to get out of their current listing situation. And maybe that buyer that they thought was going to actually close just couldn't get another buyer for their home. So I would say more dialogue, more communication needs to be had. If you want to speak with me about those one-on-one situations, I'm happy to have those conversations and talk strategy. But this pretty much is, there is limited inventory. So if I was it depends on the seller situation. Do they have to move? Are they wanting to move soon? Or are they wanting to kind of wait this out? You don't know unless you have those conversations. So best to have the conversation with the listing agent, find out what the real situation is about their possession or moving.
So how does it work? And one last question is, how does it work when we've got multiple contingencies in a row? I know it's been a fast moving market the last couple of years, but are we seeing that happen? And how does that work in terms of closing and possession?
Yeah, I mean, here's an example that came across, I think, last week where we saw, I don't know if this answers the question, but you've got a home sale, you got 3 offers. One of them has a home sale contingency, but it's paying cash, and 2 others are finance buyers. Well, with everything going on, that home sale contingency that can sell very quickly might actually be the best deal that's cash versus going with a finance buyer where you have low appraisals and you have issues with financing or a buyer losing their job. So that one, if I was laying those 3 offers on the table, I certainly would pick the one that was a home sale contingency, or at least weigh that differently with the seller that this might be the best option. We want to get more information. We could counter and ask them to cut their contingency timeline down. We could certainly ask for more information about the listed property or a copy of their CMA. But I would say that offer that was a cash buyer with no finance contingency, but has a home sale contingency, may be the better of the 3. So again, you need to think about it before you respond or pitch. It's not always the finance buyers that are good. You got to look at all of the contingencies or terms to determine what's best for your seller and what is your seller most impressed by. Sometimes it's not about price. Sometimes it's about their moving plans. Sometimes it's about the terms or the financing. Sometimes it's just, hey, do they have the cash to close? And they don't want to deal with an appraisal. So a lot of things determine what is the best offer. It's not always just about the one contingency over another. I don't know if that answered the question. I apologize if it doesn't.
Well, great information, but I guess I'll clarify my question. So if you're representing the seller and I submit a contingent offer, but my sellers themselves have a contingent offer on their property, right? So multiple contingencies in a row.
Yeah, that is not desirable in this marketplace. So, that would be something you have to get permission, and it's not something that is good. You have to get permission. It has to be legally drafted. It's a very complicated contract when you start layering like that. And I don't believe you can do that if you're contingent. I don't believe that the MLS allows it. I think Larry Luttrell actually asked the MLS, and I believe that that's not possible to be contingent and then have them accept a contingent sale. Make sense? So it's double contingency, basically.
Cool. So I know that that's all the questions I think we had today, but I know that we had some bad audio in there, especially in the beginning. We'll see if we can find the recording from a year ago and send that in addition to this recording, that you guys have all the information you need regarding those forms.
Okay, awesome. And then I didn't have time to cover 22Q, but we can cover that at a later time. But be careful out there. I mean, if you run the risk where you do have the home sale contingency, where you should be putting a 22B, and you are basically representing that you have 22A, don't breach, because if you're a listing agent and you have somebody that's putting 50% down, and you're like, this doesn't feel right, like it almost feels like they have a home to sell, you may want to counter and verify on the 22A, where are those funds coming from? And many of you listing agents need to do a better job at vetting those buyers that may have those pretty hefty down payment, because what happens if they decided not to use a 22B, which could be considered a breach, kind of trying to slip one through fast with you, and playing the dates and not actually verifying that down payment, it is money that they have in their bank account, and it's not contingent on the sale of some funds that are coming from the sale of a home. So in that example, you'd want to counter back with the 22EF and ask them to verify those funds that are described on 22A. Watch those 50% downs, those 40% downs. A lot of them are homes that need, the cash is coming from the sale of a home, and that buyer's agent has just not had enough experience or training on how to use the 22B and use it appropriately. So that's all I've got tonight. Thanks so much for jumping on. I appreciate your time and attention, you guys, even with the lack of audio. I apologize. I'm talking in the thin air at times. So see you later, and we'll talk to you soon.